Hey everybody, it's Kenny McIntosh here from Inside the Ropes, and thank you for watching one of our YouTube videos here on our YouTube channel, home of our YouTube videos. Happy New Year. It is January the 2nd. I hope that you all had a great time, whatever you got up to. As I'm sure all of you are aware, though, we got the sad news today that MEAN GENE OKERLUND has passed away at age 76. One of the best of all time, WWE Hall of Famer, announcer, interviewer, host extraordinaire, one of the best. And I'm sure, like all of you, or like all of us, sorry, you are saddened by the news. So we wanted to delve into the Inside the Ropes vaults, and we have a 90-minute interview that we did with MEAN GENE back in 2012, and we're going to play that here for you over two parts. The first part is here, where we talk to Gene about WrestleMania I, WrestleMania II from 3 locations, WrestleMania 3, being in the Hall of Fame, Bobby the Brain Heenan, and so much more. So we hope that in this kind of sad time that you can listen to Gene at his absolute best. He is one of our favourite interviews we've ever done. Here's part 1 with MEAN GENE OKERLUND. And we promised you that for 6 months of the show we were going to get someone special, and by God have we got someone special. This man has been a part of the AWA, the WWF, the WCW. He sang the national anthem at the first WrestleMania. He's tag teamed with Hulk Hogan, announcer extraordinaire, a man of many hats. It is the one and only WWE Hall of Famer, MEAN GENE OKERLUND. MEAN GENE, welcome to Inside the Ropes.
Well, Kenny and Robert, thank you guys a whole lot. Of course, I've been thinking a lot about what's going on in the UK these days. You know, a few weeks back they had the big, I think it was a Diamond Jubilee for the Queen. I wish I could have been there for that. I think I could have had a lot of fun with her. You know, sitting down and having a cocktail. Nothing further, of course.
Nothing further. I've always thought the Queen needed a good cocktail.
She did. Matter of fact, over at Royal Albert Hall in the mid-'80s, she was up in the mezzanine level, the balcony, so to speak, with Lord Alfred Hayes, and they embraced cocktails for about a half hour, 45 minutes, and she took a bump over the side and fell about 25 feet, shook it off and went on with her business.
Now we know how he got to be a lord.
Right.
So we're just going to get cracking with the questions, Gene.
Gene, so the last time that we saw you on WWE television was part of the old school SmackDown Blast from the Past, where you got to tag team with Sheamus. Do you enjoy hanging about with the new guys and getting to go out in front of the crowds and work with them?
Yeah, I love to hang out with the new guys, and Sheamus especially is, he's a very bright star right now on the horizon in the WWE. He does all the right things. He's got the look. I never told him to go into a tanning booth. He'd have to do that on his own. But he certainly is a big man, and he's a very, very good worker. Now he's working on his communication skills. He's going to be pretty good behind the camera and the microphone.
Yeah, and you know, for yourself, Gene, your career started a few years ago, and you were working in broadcasting, and then you got your start in wrestling with the AWA with Vern Gagne. How did that come about? How did you make the jump from broadcasting to wrestling?
Well, I did back in the old days what they call top 40 radio, which was playing 40 of the top hits of the country at the time, and you just played them over and over and over again, and the jocks would come in with a little patter here and there, just kind of run contests and things like that. But I went over to a television station and took a job as a account executive. You know what an account executive is? He's a frickin' salesman. So I was a peddler, and I happened to be walking across the studio floor one Saturday afternoon, and a gentleman latched onto me and said, "You're Gene Okerlund. You've got a broadcasting background." I said, "I have." He says, "Do you have a coat and tie on you?" I says, "Not on me, but I've got one back here in my office." And he says, "We've got a live show at 6 o'clock tonight, and we don't have an announcer." Well, I was lost at that point, because I knew nothing about wrestling. I'd taken kind of an interest in it, and in watching it periodically when I was a kid, and I did enjoy it. But to be part of it, I didn't know if I was up to that. As things turned out, it was a perfect fit, and that was in April of 1971, and I haven't quit since.
And Gene, what are your favourite memories from the period where you worked in the AWA, and how did you come to move away from that company as well?
Well, I got a lot of great memories because, this is before the advent of cable TV and mass production of distributing product all over the country and now all over the world. It was just kind of a tiny little shell in the United States that ran essentially from Chicago out to San Francisco and most points in between. Minneapolis, St. Paul, Milwaukee, Denver, Salt Lake City, out in the Bay Area. We ran both Oakland and San Francisco. So it was a pretty huge territory, and kind of worked that. And all of a sudden, we got the right kind of chemistry going with our TV program, and this thing caught on fire. And then the arrival in late 1979 of Hulk Hogan, I guess, kind of etched forever a new era in professional wrestling, because I've said this before. I said it on the Legends of Wrestling. Hulk is undoubtedly the biggest draw that professional wrestling has ever had. Number one, he did it first. And number one, I don't think anybody has ever outdone what he had accomplished over a 20 or 22-year career in and out of the ring.
And what led you to leaving the AWA to go into the WWF? What was the catalyst for that jump?
Well, Hulk had made a pact with Vince McMahon Jr., and he said, I'm leaving in late 1983, as I kind of go back on the calendar. And he left, and he called me, and I talked to Vince a couple of times, Pat Patterson, but I had my own business in Minneapolis. I had a advertising and marketing firm, and I really didn't want to leave that. The wrestling was kind of a sideline. But all of a sudden, the money got so big that greed reared its ugly head, and here I go again, off to New York to work with Hulk, Vince, and what a cast of characters.
And Gene, do you think, I think we know the answer, but do you think the WWF would have taken off the way it did without Hogan?
I think it was destined to do something. I think Hogan, though, was really the catalyst with his magic, his size, his look. He wasn't a classic worker in the ring, but, he entertained people. He gave them what he wanted, and he always won. He had always shown the pythons and everything else for 5 minutes after his match, and the fans really embraced him. And that love affair lasted, I'd say, the better part of 10 years.
Yeah, and then Gene, when you were in the WWF and you were working with Hulk Hogan and Vince McMahon, you were in the inner circle of the planning of WrestleMania I. How long did that kind of take to put together, and how was that concept developed? How did it come about?
Well, it was back in the days when cable wasn't quite on board yet, but they had a way of distributing product through closed circuit television. I don't know if you're familiar with that, Kenny and Robert, but that's when they would set up in say like a hall or a venue of some sort, and they would just broadcast it directly onto a movie screen, and that way you could see the event no matter where you were. They did a lot of it in this country, and of course the events themselves were huge. The first one in Madison Square Garden, I didn't know what the hell was going to take place. I rode over to the building, over to Madison Square Garden with Jesse Ventura, and he says, "Well, what do you think's going to happen, Gene?" And I said, "Yes, if I had a clue, I'd let you in on it, but this is the first time for everybody. And it was. But what eventually was presented to the public, to the wrestling fans, in a jam-packed Madison Square Garden was a thing of beauty. I mean, it was like that fireworks display they had for the Queen on the 60th anniversary of her becoming the Anointed One, as we say. And it was just something that it never looked back. It changed the landscape of sports entertainment forever. You brought in mainstream people, Muhammad Ali, the boxer, Billy Martin, manager of the Yankees. Billy Joel was supposed to be there to sing the national anthem, but he must end up with some hot tomato someplace because I sang the national anthem. But it was great. They had the Radio City Rockettes, Liberace, one of the most colorful men I've ever had the opportunity to work with. And I just think it was a sensational show. If that thing wouldn't have happened, that company would have shut down the next day.
And Gene, at that time, Bruno Sammartino was with the WWF, and since then he's expressed in many interviews that he was quite unhappy with the direction of the WWF and the way that wrestling was going. Was that quite noticeable at the time? Was he sort of visibly unhappy with it all?
No, not at that juncture. When he walked away from the business is when he became a little more vocal about what was going on. And I think what he didn't like is he didn't like the new wave, so to speak, where all of a sudden we got away from enhancement matches and got into regular television matches. And 1991, of course, along came, or 92, I believe now, Nitro. And that show is just getting ready to celebrate its 1,000th episode on July the 23rd in St. Louis, Missouri. Bruno, I just talked to him a couple of weeks ago up in Toronto. And Bruno, believe me, still loves the business. But Bruno was, a long time WWF champion. And he actually thought he was the champion. Somebody didn't just hand that belt over to him. He earned it. And probably he did. But I think at 77 years old now, Bruno Sammartino is tempering his thoughts because obviously we like to see this guy go into the Hall of Fame. Longtime champion and certainly one of the biggest names ever in our great sport.
And Gene, you mentioned that you rode over to Madison Square Garden for WrestleMania with Jesse Ventura. So what are your biggest memories of the actual day of WrestleMania from when you woke up until you went to sleep? What were your biggest memories of that day and backstage?
Well, I remember getting up at a Midtown hotel, a very fashionable Midtown hotel called the Plaza, and had a couple of cups of coffee. They were about $10 a cup, by the way. And got my tuxedo on and got ready and went through a few notes, and we had not really rehearsed, but we had talked and walked through some of the things we were going to be doing at the first WrestleMania. And Jesse didn't know what to expect, like most of us. Didn't really know how the thing was going to play out. But once we got in there, and those thousands upon thousands of fans in the Garden, which is kind of a special place. You've got a number of venues like that in the UK, Robert and Kenny, and this is a very special one here. And just, from beginning to end, it was excitement. It was excitement. And the fans walked away, of course, just absolutely out of their minds with... They had to have more. And hence sprung the Rock and Wrestling Connection, which was spearheaded, so to speak, by Hulk Hogan and the lovely female star who I saw a couple of weeks ago, Cyndi Lauper. Girls just want to have fun. She was managing Wendy Richter at that time. So there was a lot of things going on. There was a lot of material coming out of WrestleMania I to kind of catapult the WWF or WWE into a whole new era. And that's when I say that's when the music began. Not ended. This is no American Pie. This is when it started.
And Gene, fans fondly remember the rivalry between Roddy Piper and Mr. T, which obviously spilled out of the ring into their sort of own lives. Was there any tension between them on the day of WrestleMania? Was it quite heated between them?
Well, I didn't detect any change. Mr. T is a former bouncer at a bar someplace in Chicago, and he's not a real professional guy. I mean, he didn't show up on time. He didn't cooperate. Roddy Piper, very cooperative, very talented, and we're lucky that main event came off as well as it did. You know, when you take a look at Hogan and Mr. T, and then on the other side, Paul Orndorff, Roddy Piper, but they had Ace Cowboy Bob Orton in the corner. So there could have been a lot of components there that could have fallen apart on the spot. But they held it together, and you'll have to admit, go back and take a look at it this afternoon. Great show. Great show.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, earlier on we mentioned that you came back recently and tag teamed with Sheamus, but that wasn't your most famous tag team match that you were involved in. Your most famous one was with Hulk Hogan, teaming up against George Animal Steel, Mr. Fuji. How did that all come about? And what are your memories of the vignettes of training with the Hulkster leading up to the big match?
Well, actually, Kenny, that's a pretty simple little deal. Hulk Hogan was so full of confidence that he said, after being agitated by both Mr. Fuji and George the Animal Steel, he said, I could take him on myself. Well, the president of the WWF at that time, of course, was the great Jack Tunney, and he insisted that you've got to have a partner. We're not going to put some guy in the ring against two that break all the rules the way it is. So he says, well, I'll find a partner. And I said, now, where are you going to find a partner in 3 weeks' time? He says, trust me, I'll find one. The following week, he says, I found my man. And I said, this is the word that everybody has been waiting for. And he said, Mean Gene, you're my partner. And, of course, my knees buckled, and I just about broke out in tears. Said, you've got to be kidding me. Exposing me to violence, getting in the ring with these two animals? I don't want to do that. I wouldn't want to risk your career. Well, eventually he talked me into it, and I'm sure you know the rest is history. I was so happy that Hulk was cleaning house in there with Fuji and George the Animal Steel that when he came by me, I gave him the high five. Referee said, that's a legal tag. And that meant that I had to get into the ring. I didn't even wear a jock strap. No protection at all. So I was kind of hanging it out in the breeze. But I got in there. As things turned out, I had to scramble a little bit, but we got the job done. And as you know, I got the pin, not by any thing that I myself did, but Hogan just threw me on top of Fuji and George Steele and put his big foot on my ass, and there went the 1, 2, 3, hand in the air, and we're winners. So very exciting.
Definitely. And Gene, we were talking about Roddy Piper just a second ago, and the saying is that, for every great hero there needs to be a great villain. And do you think that maybe Roddy wasn't given enough credit for his part in WrestleMania?
Oh, no, I think he was given all the credit that was due him. He may talk about he was the main event. Listen, you've got to have the good guy, the bad guy. You've got to have some controversy. You've got to have somebody that can work with the Hogan. And Roddy Piper, by the way, was a very good worker. I don't know if you know this or not, but he was a kind of a Gold Gloves boxing champion. in his younger days. And he certainly could use his mouth. He was very good at communicating on camera, and he could sure do it in the ring as far as telling a story. And Roddy was a huge part. I can't say maybe not as big as Hogan, but certainly Hogan wouldn't have been as big as he turned out to be without the presence of Roddy Piper.
And Gene, we've spoken at length about WrestleMania I, and you yourself had said that if it hadn't worked, WWF would have had to close their doors, but it did work. And the next year, it was WrestleMania II, and it was kind of stacked with celebrities. It was in 3 different cities. How did you feel about that concept of doing 3 different cities and having a main event in each town and having 1 hour of in-ring action and 2 hours on the screen?
Well, it was different, Ken and Robert. It certainly different. The first one was all under one roof. Now all of a sudden we're at Nassau, on Long Island in New York. We're at the I think it was called, I don't know, the Allstate Arena or whatever, Rosemont Arena in Chicago, and also out at the Forum or LA Sports Arena in LA, and they had main events in each place. I was stationed in Chicago. Hulk had his match out on the West Coast. Jesse the Body Ventura did commentary with Mrs. Dick Ebersol, the gal from McMillan and Wife, and I think her name was Susan St. James. But there were a lot of components there. We had the Battle Royal pitting the WWF superstars against the NFL's greatest, and that turned out to be kind of like a Pier 6 brawl. Her body's flying all over the place. Tough to keep track of. But I think it was a good event. I don't think you can string out or stretch out an event of that magnitude and keep the same kind of intimacy and reaction from a crowd in 3 different venues. And as you know, the next year we went back to Detroit at the Pontiac Silverdome for WrestleMania III, blew the house down with nearly 94,000 people in there. And by the time they walked out of that Silverdome, they were wrung out. That was a show like none other. The headliner, of course, Andre and Hulk Hogan. But what about Savage and Ricky Steamboat? And all of the tag team matches and everything. I mean, it was a great, great show.
Yeah, it was indeed, Gene. And you are sort of remembered for the backstage interview promos that you used to conduct, and I think everyone still wishes it was you that was doing them today, to be honest. But who were your most memorable guys to try and interview, both good and bad, in the backstage promos?
Well, that's going to be a long, long laundry list. Obviously, I had a lot of fun working with guys like Bobby Heenan. Bobby Heenan was so glib. He was so good. I mean, he could communicate. He could irritate people to the point where, God, he'd walk in an arena somewhere in the country, and a little old lady would grab her purse and hit him over the head with it. I mean, that's how incensed these people would be because of what Bobby Heenan said. And he didn't do anything to discourage it, although he didn't like to get in the middle of a fray. Other great talkers, Hogan established himself very quickly. Roddy Piper was excellent back in those days. And even the guys like the British Bulldogs, Davey Boy Smith and Dynamite Kid, they came along, and their communicative skills weren't quite what they should have been at the beginning, but they polished them up, and in the meantime, they let Matilda do the talking. Did anybody get that?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought I'd throw that in. I should have thrown it out. Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, Gene. There's a clip now that's kind of become famous on YouTube of one of your interviews that you did with Ken Patera, and it was you interviewing him, and he kind of was trying to tell the audience what was going to happen the next week, and it was in quite a dry tone, but you didn't seem to be able to keep a straight face. And there was a couple of times where you had to kind of look away from the camera. Do you remember that promo at all?
Well, I do. I think I've had more than one of those over the years. Ken Patera is a guy that kind of cracks me up. And when you get a guy kissing his own body, what are you going to do? You're going to cry? You're going to walk off the set? Of course I've got to crack a smile and try to hide it as much as I can.
And I think another one of your memorable backstage interviewing moments was at SummerSlam '89 when the part of the set, unfortunately, fell down and you...
That was unfortunate. That was unfortunate. Yeah, and I dropped the F-bomb.
You did, way before anyone else did. You dropped it first. And, you know, in the 80s, as well as being the announcer and doing all the backstage promos, you sang Tutti Frutti on the Wrestling Album CD. You had an action figure made of you. Did you ever think that, you know, your career would end up with you singing on an album and having a figure of yourself?
No, quite candidly, I never had expected it would turn out like that. But, you know, anything for a good time and for entertainment. And that's what professional wrestling has finally come to. It is the total entertainment package. I think if you guys, and I know you did, you took a close look at WrestleMania 28 firsthand, and you can't tell me that match between Rock and Cena didn't just bring the crowd to their feet. It was that exciting with all of the false finishes, with all of the action, with the chemistry in there. Man, it's tough to beat a match like that. It really is.
And Gene, after the success of WrestleMania, the WWF branched out into other pay-per-view events, and they came up with the concept of the Survivor Series. Did you enjoy the sort of 8-man elimination matches, and do you wish that they would bring that back now?
Well, I mean, obviously somebody's felt that that particular format or idea has maybe run its course, and they're using that in other ways in other pay-per-views. I personally think we have way too many pay-per-views. I don't think we get a chance to adequately develop the storylines with the issues between the guys and gals that are going to be meeting on the next pay-per-view card. So I'd like to see us down to about 8 pay-per-views a year. But here again, you're a publicly traded company. Revenue is a very important a part of that company being successful, and hence 13 pay-per-views a year.
And Gene, we touched on WrestleMania 3, and you were talking about the match between Ricky Steamboat and Randy Savage. And, you know, Randy Savage unfortunately passed away last year. And what are your sort of memories of him? And there's a lot of people that, you know, talk about his paranoia and his protectiveness over Elizabeth. What were your experiences with him and your memories of Randy?
I had nothing but great experiences with both Randy and Liz. Randy was a little quirky, there's no doubt about that, but also he was a consummate professional. Man, he came in there prepared. He dressed like like a champion. Later on, when he teamed up with Hogan, they became the Mega Powers, and all of these things. Randy Savage certainly has got to have the status of a Tier 1 player in the WWE. And a matter of fact, I'm going to say he was just as important as anybody. If you want to bring it down to individuals, but I think the whole WWE scene was a collective effort. All of them. From the first match of the night to the main event that would consummate a pay-per-view. All of those people, very important. They worked hard. We lost a lot of them through the years, but, the business has survived, and I like what I see today. Family-friendly, entertaining, and just a lot of fun.
And Gene, Randy's one of the, like Bruno Sammartino, one of the sort of guys that you would expect to be in the WWE Hall of Fame, and Randy's one of the only guys that's never really came back to the WWE in any form. Do you think that was
Wait a minute, Kenny, are you telling me that the WWE hadn't made an overture to Randy Savage about being inducted into the Hall of Fame? That's BS. He was asked a number of times. He declined.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to ask you. That's what I was going to ask you, because obviously you hear a lot of stories, and we just kind of wondered, was it Randy's part that said, no, I don't want to go? Was that what it was? Was it Randy that wasn't keen on going into the Hall of Fame?
Well, for whatever reason, and that's what I'm still trying to figure out, for whatever reason, he is not in the Hall of Fame, and neither is the late Miss Elizabeth. They're both gone now, and I think they should be inducted, but I don't know if we're going to see that day for a while. And Bruno Sammartino should be in the Hall of Fame. I saw Bruno, I told you, in Toronto, and he was there with Dominic DeNucci and the Wolfman and some of the old guys from 50 years ago. And those guys should be in that Hall of Fame, so we cover all the eras.